With the 23rd Monster Jam World Finals taking place tomorrow, I figured it's a perfect time to take a trip down memory lane and rate the first 19 World Finals that took place at the Sam Boyd Stadium in Las Vegas, Nevada. A few comments before I get into this. Each World Finals was ranked based on its time period and not necessarily in relation to each other. So basically just saying that the World Finals that took place in 2002 isn't rated on the same scale as the World Finals that took place in 2012, right? It's different time periods. It's more in relation to what Monster Jam was like during that time period rather than just, comparing them all on the same scale and just getting, the old ones at the bottom and some of the newer ones or whatever up towards the top. Also, both the racing and freestyle events were scored separately on a scale of 1 to 10 with quarter points. So I could give a 0.25, a 0.5, a 0.75, or a whole number. And then the overall event score that I'm going to show is the average of the racing and the freestyle scores. So if I gave racing a 4.5 and freestyle a 5, the overall event average is a 4.75, and that's the score that I give the actual event. Now, these are purely based on the quality of the event and not necessarily based on the historical context or how iconic certain moments were during it. That'll come up in just a little bit. And also, I'd love to hear your opinions down in the comments of what your favorite and least favorite World Finals are. Maybe you have your own ranking and you want to give that. But first, here's my ranking of the Las Vegas World Finals. Number 19, World Finals 1, 4.25 out of 10. This is probably an unpopular one to start, but the first ever World Finals is at number 19 in last place on my list. Now, before any hate, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? The first edition of really anything should end up being the worst to show that the event progressed throughout the years, right? If the first one ends up being the best of something, that means it was just made worse every single time that it happened again after that. With this, it shows that it at least improved based upon the first ever one. And even though this is ranked number 19, this wasn't a bad event by any means. However, the racing course that we all have come to love from Las Vegas and the Sam Boyd Stadium was very much ahead of its time and was a little bit too advanced for what was going on around that time. And most drivers didn't really get a good handle on it for another couple of years. But as was normal at Las Vegas in the early 2000s, it seemed like it was impossible for Tom Meents to lose, and that was especially true during this World Finals as he dominated literally every race that he had that night and walked home to his first ever World Finals Racing Championship. Now for freestyle, it was definitely the better portion of the event of the two. In terms of 2000 standards, runs were pretty good and had pretty big moves, right? I mean, you think about Lyle Hancock's reverse move up the center obstacle. It's a very historic moment and something that nearly got him a freestyle championship in that first year. How about Tom flipping his truck going off the center jump after landing on a pole in some uneven ground and kind of tumbling that truck all over, ripping a wheel off, blowing a wheel off, breaking tie rods and four links. I mean, it was absolutely crazy, and that happened right at the beginning of his run. And how about the only perfect score that's ever been recorded in World Finals history from Dennis Anderson as the last truck out, right? It was, at that time, a very, very impressive freestyle run, which netted him a perfect 40, the highest score in World Finals history. So it's an iconic World Finals for sure, and the one that started it all and continued to grow upon that as it went on. But maybe in a good way for the fans, in some weird twisted way, maybe it's good that it comes in at number 19. Number 18, World Finals 5, 4.375 out of 10. Now this will probably be the most controversial on this list. In fact, it was pretty controversial for myself when doing this, right? This is not something I thought was going to happen. World Finals 5 has a lot of major moments, but they don't actually add up to an actual good event, right? They're really good to look back on and say, look at this moment, look at this moment, look at this moment. But it just didn't provide an overall really good event. Now, history was made in racing. Dennis finally got his racing championship after 22 years of trying. But, other than that, there's nothing really to talk about from the racing. The racing wasn't good, right? The right lane had a huge advantage, and it was to the point where the left lane was nearly impossible to win from. It felt unusable at times, and certain races were just it was just very one-sided. There weren't really any close races. The closest one I can remember is Pablo and Tom in the semifinals, where Tom got stuck in that left lane and ended up almost making it work. And the only other crazy moments that I can think of is the Medusa crash after the line, or the El Toro Loco crash. Other than that, there's not really any close races to really think back on. And then you go up to freestyle, and freestyle was actually a mess, and it had controversy sprinkled in basically everywhere, right? More times than not, runs ended early, right? Trucks broke early, and runs were more rewarded for filling the clock and taking it easy for a good bit of the run, rather than having a good run. Or the other way to get a good score that night was to just have one big move, even though the rest of your run wasn't all that good, right? And then when you know that the judges rescored the El Toro Loco run because the fans booed because it didn't take the lead, that's also weird, right? That doesn't sit well with you. And the 3 runs that tied for the win, right, they didn't really deserve a victory, right? I mean, Lupe and El Toro Loco jumping through Bounty Hunter was cool, right? I mean, iconic moment. Medusa knocking Bounty Hunter off the stack was cool, iconic moment. Tom going absolutely ballistic and hammering his truck into basically everything on the track because it was broken and he needed to try and get the wheel off, once again, was very cool. But none of them were actually good runs, right? They had cool moments. In the case of Tom, it was chaotic, it was entertaining, but was it one that was going to win a freestyle competition? I don't think any of them could be said as that, right? And watching that World Finals back, I was trying to think about what run I thought deserved that victory, and really thinking about it, the only one I could say was like this was a winning run was Neil Elliott in Hot Wheels, right? But he didn't even take the lead after his freestyle run, right? The commentary was, oh, this is definitely going to take the lead. And then the scores came and he didn't even take the lead. So this was a very messy World Finals, and for that reason, it's gotten put down at number 18. Number 17, World Finals 6, 4.625 out of 10. This is the only Las Vegas World Finals to get rained on at number 17. So honestly, the rain did create a very compelling racing competition, right? Up to this point, the World Finals in terms of racing had been kind of stale and kind of straightforward, right? The first 3 seasons, it was Tom just kind of dominating the showing, right? And as of the past, however many years before that, it was Tom Mensch, Jimmy Crete, Pablo Huffaker, and Dennis Anderson, right? That was the Final Four in World Finals 3. It was the Final Four in World Finals 5. Jimmy Crete made the final round in World Finals 3, 4, and then made the semifinals in World Finals 5. Well, here we are now at World Finals 6, and because of the rain, there was randomness lurking everywhere, and what was Tom's big benefit in that time was him being able to control the speed down the straightaways, going fast down the straight, but also controlling the truck in the corner, right? And the track with the rain had turned from a fast one to one where drivers really had to manage and control their trucks, which was very fascinating to watch, right? And this led to big upsets in racing and kind of costly mistakes, which caused big upsets as well. And underdogs ended up kind of prevailing, right? David Smith and Medusa both made it to the semifinals, to the Final Four, right? And those were two people that you said, well, maybe Medusa could make, one win or something, but she probably wasn't a write-in for the Final Four. David Smith was definitely not a write-in for the Final Four, but they both made it, and then you had a pretty competitive final round. It was decently close, and it was Medusa and Dennis Anderson going after it, and Medusa, as mentioned, shocked the monster truck world and won the racing championship. So, this was definitely one of the better early year racing events in World Finals Las Vegas history. But then we moved to freestyle, right? And freestyle took everything that was bad from World Finals 5, but didn't bring the good with it. So that wasn't all that good. It's one of my lowest rated freestyle events from Las Vegas. This was another one, just like World Finals 5, where filling the clock out just seemed hard, right? It just seemed like drivers couldn't do it. And runs were just kind of suffering, right? And I really think of the 3 runs of the past champions, right? The reigning champions from World Finals 5. Lupe's run, Medusa's run, and Tom's run, all super lackluster. Jim Kohler's run, lackluster. Dennis Anderson stuffed it into the trailer, right? I mean, the list goes on and on. Paul Cohen's run, not so good. Chris Bergeron's not so good. You know, you just kind of go through these runs and you're like, wow, these weren't really all that good at all, right? They were actually pretty bad. And I would honestly say the biggest moment of the night was Dan Evans doing his double reverse move where he went over the bus and then went over that giant container backwards, and it really delighted up in the booth Scott Douglas, Ken Stout, and Tom Mentz. Now, I will say one improvement from World Finals 5 to World Finals 6. I think the judges really did get the winner right. I know that it was another tiebreaker situation, and this time they actually had the tiebreaker in place, and Jimmy Creighton beat Tony Farrell in the tiebreaker, but Creighton filled the clock. He had very good momentum, pretty solid moves. Tony Farrell was probably going to beat him, but he didn't fill the clock, right? If Farrell finishes those final 15, 20 seconds, no doubt I think he gets at least a point or two higher than Jimmy Creighton and wins outright. But I think with how it went, the judges got it right for Jimmy Creighton to win it. But, I mean, them getting it right doesn't change the fact that it was one of the most lackluster freestyle events in the entirety of the Las Vegas World Finals history. So that's why World Finals 6 ranks in at number 17 on the list. Number 16, World Finals 17, 5.375 out of 10. Now moving on to a completely different era of Monster Jam, World Finals 17 comes in at number 16 on this list. Occurring during an era of very competitive and fast World Finals racing, that competition wasn't actually that bad, right? Racing from about World Finals 15 all the way up to the end was probably the best stretch of racing at Las Vegas, right? It really started to get good right down towards the end. And something that I didn't know about World Finals 17, because I never watched, any TV coverage of it. I just seen, some clips from the stands. I'd never known that they were pushing times during the race down into the 15.5 range. That is absolutely insane. For so long at the World Finals, if you had a sub 16.5, you were there to play and probably win, make your way deep into the bracket. And now, with how they were qualifying and how they were racing, if you ran a 16.4, you were probably like middle of the road. So that's just how much guys were able to improve on the course. But it wasn't just one or two guys improved. Every single person was moving the needle and going faster and faster and faster. I'd honestly say that this World Finals was the fastest Las Vegas World Finals on average in terms of racing times, right? There were a lot of competitive races, which once again, pretty natural for this time frame, as we'll see in a little bit. And it just felt like numerous guys had a chance at any given moment, any given race. So, yeah, I think racing, honestly, World Finals 17 racing is some of the best racing that the World Finals has ever had. But now let's shift gears to what I would call the worst freestyle competition in Las Vegas World Finals history. So not only were the jumps way too steep to keep trucks from breaking, but watching this back, I have no clue whatsoever what the judges were actually watching, right? I don't think they were watching what anyone else was watching that night. So many times, scores just seemed to be thrown out there with no substance behind them, and it ultimately really hindered the event, right? I think Damon Bradshaw had far and away the most superb run of the night and one of the better runs in World Finals history, right? And he didn't get to the lead over a guy who filled his regulation, hit a backflip, failed the backflip, and only completed like 3, 4, 5 seconds of bonus time. And that guy somehow got 1.5 bonus points. I really do not get it. And I mean, there weren't really all that many runs either where you look at them and you go, wow, that was good, right? I mean, obviously this was the World Finals where Dennis had his last hurrah, right? Not only was it his last World Finals ever, but it was his best freestyle performance since World Finals 9. Right, so Dennis really came out. He had those 2 great saves. He got into the hot seat for the first time since World Finals 7, where he sat there for one truck after Tom Mentz went out. But Yeah, and then you had Adams' run, which was going good until he obviously missed the backflip and then didn't finish much of bonus time at all. And then Damon's run, but those are really the only three that you look at and you go, they could have won. And really, I think there were only two that should have had a chance to win. It was Damon and Dennis's, and I think Damon had the upper edge on anyone, but it just didn't play out that way. So, I mean, it was a criticized event when it happened, and I'm going to criticize it again right here. So, yeah, that's why it's number 16 on this list. Number 15, World Finals 15, 5.625 out of 10. So apparently the two-day World Finals events were horrendous, as World Finals 15 comes in at number 15. So this, though, was one of the best racing events in Las Vegas World Finals history. I'll just put that out there, right? It seemed like at least half the field probably could have made the case for maybe bringing home the victory, right? I do think that I didn't rate racing a little bit higher because I gave it a slight deduction purely based on that final semifinals race where Tom Mentz and Lee O'Donnell had the thing, the controversy where Tom got inadvertently shut down in Thunder Alley, and then they reran the race, and then Lee lost, and Tom made it to the finals, and there was a whole thing like, Lee was like, if this happened to me, we wouldn't have rerun it, since it's Tom, we reran it, all that stuff, and it's the only time in World Finals history where I think Tom Mentz got booed. Not only did he get booed that night during racing, right? Like when he pulled to the line in the finals and they announced it, people booed. And I think even the next day, still people were booing him. But that's a whole different topic. And then speaking of the next day, we all know the issues with freestyle, right? They really tried to make a course that would encourage big air, big jumps, crazy tricks, go big or go home style freestyles. But the opposite really happened because they cluttered the floor so much, right? So, and it ended up being a freestyle competition where holding back and being more technical was the overall key for performing well. And really, most of the runs, nearly any run that scored well, did so purely based on the fact that they survived and that they completed most, if not all, of the clock. And the only exception to this is Todd LeDuc's run, where he did the LeDuc leap into the stadium and kept that momentum going all throughout. And it's one of the greatest freestyle runs in World Finals history for that reason of, hey, he did this at a track that was biting basically everyone that came before him. So that run alone probably saved this freestyle competition from getting any lower treatment than World Finals 17. But, very good racing, but a messy freestyle is what puts World Finals 15 down at number 15. Number 14, World Finals 16, 5.625 out of 10. So I think everyone could see this coming with World Finals 16 at number 14. Racing once again was the highlight, right? There were a lot of upsets and a jumbled up bracket towards the end of the show, and a ton of races ended up with photo finishes as well, and some were so close that if you were to show the naked eye, they would not be able to call it, and the only reason it was called was because of the timing and scoring that they had at the track. It was also a bonus that a lot of the later races, like round 3 races and semifinal races, they came down to very close margins and very close matchups. It kind of just showed that it was like, hey, you had once again a very solid list of guys that could have won, this World Finals, and it really just came down to who performed each run the best, right? Because times were so close that you couldn't just say, oh, well, this guy has a pretty good advantage, he's been running a lot faster. Everyone was running pretty similar lap times. I mean, it was exciting to see, that's for sure. And I mean, the excitement kind of came through in some of the commentary where it's like every race is a photo finish at this rate. It's crazy. But for the third straight World Finals on this list, freestyle was the disappointing factor of the entire event, and it's similar issues with World Finals 15 and 17. Trucks either braking early or flipping early, and just very few actual good runs, right? And I feel like most of the runs that happened, I would put in the average category. Bar Mike Vonder's run, Ryan Anderson's run, maybe even Charlie Pauken, but there's not really many runs that would be like, oh yeah, that was a very good run. I mean, it might just be those 3 that would say. But once again, I just don't understand the judging. The scoring was way off, and Ryan Harrison's run was super, super good, and I really don't understand how some of that scoring happened, right? I mean, he got scored so low in regulation, and then the bonus judges just didn't care as well. I mean, it it, it was weird. And then you look at Tom's score, and Tom's score just purely based on regulation, right? Tom didn't fill regulation, didn't get into bonus time because of that, right? His score was so close to Ryan's, and I really don't get what the judges were looking at during that night. And obviously, it's cool that Mike Vauders won. Mike Vauders is second in Overkill Evolution, but once again, I wish he would have won with the actual best run. I think he had a very good run, right? Probably maybe the second or third best run. At worst, the third best run, but I don't think he had the best run. I think Ryan Harrison did. So that's where it's a little weird and, once again, very controversial. So much like its predecessor, World Finals 16 had major issues, and that's why it's at number 14. Number 13, World Finals 19, 5.75 out of 10. Here we are, the last ever World Finals to be held in Sam Boyd Stadium, but unfortunately it couldn't go out with more of a bang as World Finals 19 gets placed at number 13. So compared to racing from the previous few years, this year's was lacking, a little bit lackluster and a bit disappointing, but it was still a fun bracket, right? There was still some chaos, there was still some unpredictability, some fast runs, some close runs, but it just didn't feel quite as good, right? It didn't feel quite as close as the past few racing competitions that have been on this list. Freestyle did end up alright, a little bit better than the last few on the list, but it was still a big bummer for most of it, right? I mean, most of the runs ended early and just were downright mediocre, right? There were just some runs in it where it was like, I mean, it was alright, but it wasn't great, right? And there were some points, I think it was Jim Kohler's run, where, he's coming out, he goes around, he goes to his first jump, and he flips over backwards. Some runs where in the stands you can just see body language of people where they are frustrated and aggravated with how that night was going, right? And how just infuriating you had to be in the stands seeing run after run just kind of end short like that, and especially big names that were having runs end short. Like Jim Kohler, someone you go to, I mean, he could just be the price of admission alone if he gets a good freestyle run in. So to not even get a jump in is very, very unfortunate. One good thing that came out of freestyle, though, was that a lot of the late runs actually went really well. So that created some competitiveness and unpredictability and drama on who was going to win, right? Because the bar was raised, and then it got raised again, and then it just kept getting raised by guys that were going out late, and it ended up with, I think it was the final two trucks went out, right? Final two guys, I think it was Todd the Duke went out, took the lead from Charlie Pauken, who had just gotten out a few trucks before him, and then Ryan Harrison was the last guy out, and then he went in with a walk-off freestyle, beat LeDuc as the last truck out, right? I mean, it's always fun when competitions go like that, where the final few trucks out keep one-upping each other, and you see kind of a walk-off victory. So, I mean, that was very cool, and that definitely helped up the freestyle ranking a little bit. But as you can tell, the two-day World Finals were overall a very, very big bummer, but this was somehow one of the best of them, with it coming in at number 13. Number 12, World Finals 3, 5.75 out of 10. So this was probably the hardest ranking for me to grasp, right? World Finals 3 comes in at number 12. For me personally, right, throughout my childhood, this was one of my favorite World Finals. But watching it back, it didn't live up to that hype. So like most of the early World Finals, which I kind of alluded to before, racing was a bit disappointing, right? The only real action that came from this one was the constant flipping of trucks, right? I mean, so many. I don't even know if I can list the amount of trucks that flipped. We had Bulldozer flip, Power Forward flipped, Avenger flipped, Sudden Impact went on two wheels, Bounty Hunter nearly flipped, Blacksmith took out like 15 turning poles that one run, Dennis took down the fence in one of the Thunder Alleys. I mean, it was kind of a crazy in terms of that. And as mentioned, the semifinal matchup where Huffaker and Cretan both really messed up, and Jimmy nearly flipped and then had to get his truck back going. Pablo took down like 2 or 3 poles, ended up with a big penalty, and Jimmy ended up winning it because he crossed the line before the penalty. So that was cool, but just like, those early World Finals, the racing course literally belonged to Tom Meents, right? He dominated the night. He never really had a close race, really. I think his closest race was probably the final round race between Jimmy Creighton, but Tom still won. And I think his worst pass of the night was his bye run in round 1, right? Where he nearly flipped over in the corner. And then you moved to freestyle, which wasn't really all that bad. It was a pretty decent freestyle, but it was lacking for most of the runs. I mean, a lot of the early runs beyond Hartsock's launch over that middle bus, or Mike Vonder's amazing run, which put him in the hot seat for most of the night, all those kind of early freestyles and middle of the freestyles were just mediocre, and they didn't really have all that much to them. They were kind of just guys running over the buses, running over the racing lanes, and not really going all that big, and it wasn't really until the end, kind of like World Finals 19, right? It wasn't until the last 4 runs where stuff really, really picked up, right? Pablo's energetic run where he was kind of going all over the place and running into stuff at full speed, going after that trailer they had set up with the camper on it, and doing insane donuts and going up onto the dumpster as payback from the previous year. And then you had Lyle's technical run, and which nearly got him the victory, and then you have Dennis's crazy run and with his crazy save down at the end, and then you have Tom's big moments with his big air and some of his stuff. And I mean, those last 4 runs, you could say probably any of them could have won the event, and it pretty much sold the night for the freestyle competition, and really sold the night overall. But I mean, when you look at everything overall, the event was pretty mediocre, which is why it only gets put at number 12. Number 11, World Finals 2, 6 out of 10. So here's a big step over the inaugural event. World Finals 2 comes in at number 11 compared to World Finals 1 at number 19. In all, this overall event was probably the most chaotic World Finals that has ever happened. And I really sincerely mean that in both racing and freestyle, right? So first of all, I would love to know who thought of the idea to make the run to the crush cars after the last corner longer, right? Because it resulted in less slowdown time, after they crossed the line to end the race, which caused people to really, really have to try and hit the brakes as hard as they could before they got to the dumpsters. It was pretty entertaining to see it, right? I mean, there were like 2 or 3 people that ran into stuff after the race was over, and I mean, I'm pretty sure in part that was why Pablo cartwheeled his way up into the wall protection, right? And on top of that, then you have the infamous water incident after Tom hit a pole in Thunder Alley and then broke a water line, and it flooded the right lane of Thunder Alley, right? And because of that, they then had to shorten the course to accommodate the flooding in that Thunder Alley. And then that caused some issues with the starting procedures and controversy because Brian Bartle couldn't see the green flag that was being waved in the middle because of how his truck is set up. And then he had to go back and complain and get a rerun, which was honestly a fair rerun. And then he still lost anyway. And then in the end, Tom had the track dialed in again. But he also did catch a pretty big break. I think Brian Bartle was the best if he had to go through Thunder Alley. But then since they didn't have to go through Thunder Alley, Tom's truck was very squirrely. He didn't get as squirrely because of that. And Tom ended up winning once again in racing. Now, freestyle for this time period was very, very fun. I think it was it's honestly one of the crazier and best freestyles in World Finals history. I mean, one of the biggest highlights is Jill Canuso's crazy run and her crazy ending. I mean, she took on basically every single obstacle out there and then ended it with a straight up launch into the air before coming down right on the back. I mean, that was crazy, right? And honestly, if I wanted to talk about all of the big freestyle moments from this World Finals that I could talk about, it would take way too long, right? I mean, Pablo borrowing Rage and Steel and ended up going out there and running over Sting. Tony Farrell in that Sting, blasting through an RV and then going up through the trailer as well. And Jim Kohler's crazy, RV run, and Tom's high energy run where he was going crazy, had a flat tire and ended up parking it up and getting it stuck on top of that trailer obstacle. And then obviously you can't leave out Dennis going after the Goldberg truck and obviously ending his run short because of it. So in all, a very solid World Finals and just missing out on the top 10, getting put at number 11. Number 10, World Finals 14, 6.375 out of 10. So breaking into the top 10, World Finals 14 sits at number 10. If you want a World Finals where overall both racing and freestyle could just be described as not good and not bad, this is the one you were looking for, right? I mean, it's just there. It's a World Finals that exists, and you're not really going to talk about it all that much, but it was just good enough to be a top 10 Las Vegas World Finals, right? I mean, in terms of racing, it just seemed like Adam wasn't going to lose, right? It was one of those years like Tom had for so many years, right? Adam had his own, right? He wasn't going to lose. He had the track figured out that night, and there's not really much more to say about the racing competition. I think every single run Adam had to go through that night, he absolutely dominated. Even the finals, right? He dominated against Mark McDonald as well. And then you move to freestyle, and even freestyle doesn't have all that much to talk about, right? I mean, listen, not many runs were actually all that bad, right? It was just so many runs were decent and mediocre, right? We just had a bunch of solid runs that night. But there also weren't that many that were going to make people go crazy, right? So it wasn't bad, it wasn't good, it was just there. Once again, a World Finals is just there, right? One of the first things I think of when I go to that World Finals is Pablo taking his truck literally until it started falling apart, right? And going into the hot seat because of that. And Lindsey Wink's insane tumbling save, but it came after regulation and it was in bonus, so he didn't really get all that big of a score from it. And then obviously Tom's run, which ended up winning, which once again wasn't anything amazing, right? But I think it did deserve the freestyle win overall, but it just wasn't a type of run where if you go and put it at most of the other World Finals, I don't think it would have won. So it's just mediocrity. I think fittingly puts this World Finals right near the middle of the road at number 10. Number 9, World Finals 11, 6.5 out of 10. One of the most bipolar World Finals gets ranked at number 9. This is legitimately one of the best nights of racing in World Finals history. I don't care what you say, it is legitimately one of the best, right? On top of all the crazy crashes that happened after the race was over, like the Captain's Curse crash, the Taz crash, Medusa crash, King Crunch, El Toro Loco, there were close battles, right? I mean, it was a close night of racing. I think about Tom Meents multiple times having to come from behind to get to victory, right? I think about against Damon Bradshaw and against Lindsey Wink. He was basically written off in both those races, but came from behind and snatched it right at the end. And there were also the threat of some pretty big upsets, right? John Zimmer, one of them, right? People didn't really think much, but the times were so close during qualifying night that John Zimmer placed pretty well and could have knocked off Dennis Anderson if things went a little bit differently during the race between them. This was also one of the strongest Final Fours that the World Finals has ever had. I think it was Dennis, Mark, Tom, and Lindsey. That's a pretty big list of drivers right there. And obviously, it was probably the strongest championship race that the World Finals has ever had. It was the most iconic final round matchup. The only time Dennis Anderson and Tom Meents raced for the World Finals Championship in the final round of racing. And I honestly feel honored to have been there to witness the only time they matched up in the final round. Because, I mean, it's historic, and it's something that lives in history for forever. The biggest rivalry in motorsports meeting in the final round of the World Finals for the first and only time. That is something that this World Finals is known for. But now to move to a much, much more disappointing is the freestyle competition, right? There was so much momentum coming off of racing, and then it got completely torn away by freestyle. The, the early runs were so bad. It had to be like a record for the most single-digit scores in World Finals history. I mean, it was bad. I forget what Chad Fortune got as the first trick out. It was like a 12 or a 14 or something, and he sat in the hot seat for like 6 trucks, and it was like, okay, something is wrong here, right? And I mean, it wasn't just those first few trucks. Like, eventually, people did start getting, slowly start getting better runs. And they had George Balahan's run to get him to the lead, and Jim Kohler's run was pretty good, and so was Steve Sims' run. Those were some runs that made up, but the run that really makes up is Charlie's run. Charlie Ponkin probably had the best run in Sam Boyd Stadium history that night. It was literally that good. I don't think there is any freestyle run that has ever happened at Sam Boyd Stadium that could top that one. I think it was the most high energy and chaotic run that the World Finals at Las Vegas has ever seen, right? So those last few runs in freestyle definitely ended better than it started, right? With Charlie's run, obviously, but Lindsay had a crazy run. Damon had a pretty crazy run. Tom had a run going. So it ended better than it started, but it was still a sloppy mess for most of it. And Charlie's run was really the only major bright spot in that competition. So it was one of the most inconsistent nights. Very good racing, but very poor freestyle. World Finals 11, though, gets kind of met in the middle, so it still gets put at number 9. Number 8, World Finals 4, 6.875 out of 10. Here's one of the most underrated World Finals. World Finals 4 at number 8. This is pretty much a forgotten World Finals, right? I mean, if you remember World Finals 4, you probably really only remember it for the fact that Dennis Aaronson didn't compete in it. It was the first World Finals Dennis didn't compete in. But if you actually go and watch it, it's a pretty fun one, right? It's nothing crazy, nothing extraordinary, but it's good enough, right? This was probably the first time where racing was one of the most interesting parts of that night, right? Where the prior 3 years in Vegas, racing had been Tom, and, you know, the only real entertainment that came from it were other runs or just the fact that drivers were flipping over or making mistakes during the freestyle runs. So for some reason, though, this course was just different, right? They watered it different or something. Tom didn't have really all that big of a grasp on it, right? And it created a pretty unpredictable bracket, and it ended Tom's winning streak that year. Tom had gone undefeated at Las Vegas. That ended to Scott Hartsock in just the second round of racing, right? So that created excitement of a new racing champion, and then also some surprising faces were moving up through the bracket, right? And in the end, it came down to a final round race where both drivers pushed just a little too hard, and they kind of had to sloppily make their way to the finish line, right? That's always fun to see, right? That just shows how much it means to the drivers to see them pushing all out and making mistakes, and both of them making mistakes, so that it's kind of like, it's still close, you don't know who's going to get it. It's all exciting because you're building up some drama towards that. You know, Brian Bartle coming over the line sideways, Jimmy Creighton trying to miss a pole, but just clipping it as he's trying to get back going. So I mean, it was a pretty fun racing bracket. And even freestyle was pretty solid, right? Most runs were good, decent, right? And drivers felt like they were kind of getting after it a little bit more. Lupe's run, one of the most iconic of that night, his crazy save, and then going on to get stuck in the trailer. There were other runs that were pretty solid, just like that one. I think of Lyle Hancock's final World Finals run, how solid that run was, and obviously Jim Kohler with his winning run, right, where he did basically every trick in the book and obviously deserved that win. The biggest downside for freestyle, though, was that the ending was pretty undramatic, right? The last 2 trucks going out, Gravedigger and Max D, went over early and they offered no challenge for the championship, right? Pablo over that sea container and having to try and avoid the big trailer stack and end up flipping over that way. Tom getting stuck on the RV trailer hybrid. So yeah, freestyle was that was really the biggest letdown of the night, is that there wasn't much competition towards the end of the freestyle competition. But still, it's one of the most underappreciated World Finals, and it gets put at number 8. Number 7, World Finals 10, 7 out of 10. So here's another World Finals that gets overlooked, just like World Finals 4. This is World Finals 10 at number 7 on the list, right? So racing was the big highlight of the night. There were some really big upsets and drivers that were moving pretty far into the bracket. And like most of the nights at Vegas, as has kind of been beaten on over the course of this video, it just looked like it was guaranteed to be Tom's night, unless there was some sort of mechanical issue. Now, some guys did give him a run for his money. I think about Mark McDonald trying to get the win there in the semifinal round, and obviously Alex Blackwell had run pretty fast up to that point, right? And it wouldn't be possible to talk about racing, speaking of Alex Blackwell, without talking about some of the scary crashes that happened during racing, right? Adam's scary crash in Thunder Alley, which left him out of the freestyle portion because of injury, and he split a tree in half that they kept there for a little bit. And when you walked the track the next year, you could see the tree he hit and how it was split in half. And obviously talk about Alex Blackwell's tumble into the stands, right, for the championship race. Luckily, nothing worse came from both of those incidents, and everyone walked away, at least, from the incidents. And as far as freestyle, it was on and off, right? There were a few pretty good runs, right? Kicking it off, Chris Bergeron had a pretty solid freestyle run. He had Jimmy Cretan's pretty solid run with his crazy save at the end. And obviously, the winning run, Damon Bradshaw, was very, very good that night and had a very underrated and underappreciated freestyle run. But on the flip side of that, there were also some disappointing runs and just runs where stuff wasn't really being pushed all that much, right? And then to add on to the note of the racing crashes, well, to note that Dennis ended up in the stands, right, on top of the wall in the middle of his run, had to drive off of it. And then Travis Pastrana, when he was freestyling, ended up getting into the wall with his truck. So I don't know what curse there was with the World Finals number 10 and kind of pushing the safety limitations, but maybe it's ranked at lucky number 7, fittingly, because no one was injured, even from all the scary crashes and moments during that event. Number 6, World Finals 12, 7.125 out of 10. Very similar to the previous entry on the list, World Finals 12 comes in at number 6. Another very fun racing competition with close battles and pretty big upsets. There were, obviously Tom had a handle on the track and looked pretty unbeatable, even though there were multiple other drivers that were showing up pretty fast. But in the end, Tom did come home with the victory and, just continued his dominance of racing in Las Vegas. Freestyle was pretty interesting, right? It was the first World Finals backflip from Cam McQueen, but also another tie for the freestyle win. I think that's the third ever time that the top runners tied for the freestyle win, but it was a pretty low score to tie for World Finals winning standards. And I do think that Jim Coulter did have the better run overall and deserved to get his win, but it's really interesting that no one was able to top the two that shared the hot seat for as long as they did, right? I mean, it didn't seem like the track was all that crazy and destructive, so it's just kind of crazy that so many runs ended up mediocre, but there were some big moments, right? And one of those biggest moments is Adam's crazy save down the corner of the stadium where he went on one wheel and saved it, but unfortunately, because he was on the one wheel, broke the truck, and he couldn't end up continuing. So, other than that, though, most of the runs just didn't have the same kick as they normally do at a World Finals event. Now, that doesn't make it a bad event, right? Didn't make it a bad freestyle. It was just a very solid and consistent freestyle. And that's why, it was a solid and steady World Finals. So that's why it got put at number 6. Number 5, World Finals 8, 7.25 out of 10. Just cracking the top 5 at number 5, it's World Finals 8. Very similar to World Finals 12 in the position prior, it was a solid and steady competition all throughout the night. Now, racing was pretty interesting because the track was just really dry, right? The corners were super slick as a result of that. They were really rubbering up the corners throughout the night. And that final turn, already challenging as is, was even more challenging than normal, and that's what caused some upsets that night. I think about, the Monster Mutt and Blue Thunder run where both trucks spun out the corner, and it was who could get back going fastest. I mean, those are always fun to watch, and that was kind of the original one of that besides, Blacksmith and Bounty Hunter. But it turned into a competition of making sure a driver was more steady and consistent and not necessarily pushing the hardest. And that's seen because of who won it. You know, John Cizak, a very consistent and solid racer, won it all because he was one of the more consistent drivers in terms of times that night. He never really had a fast run, but he never had a slow run. He was just consistent enough to work his way through the bracket, ended up winning, right? It was one of those times where just the most consistent driver got the benefits. And then you move to freestyle, which was pretty good. There were a lot of solid runs that got scored right around that 28 range, right? And then you obviously had Pablo's, which was the clear favorite, the clear winner of the night. No run really came close to him. You know, Pablo really had the best run. No one else really had his intensity all throughout the run. Now, there were really good moments beyond Pablo's run, right? And really a good bit of those. Think about Charlie Pauken launching straight up over that bread truck in the pond and crashing back down to earth. Or Dennis, you know, his time was up, but he still trashed his 25th anniversary body. And Tom Meents splitting his entire rear end housing in half off of the center jump. So it's a very underrated World Finals, but a very good World Finals with lots packed into it. So that's why World Finals 8 kicks off the top 5. Number 4, World Finals 13, 7.5 out of 10. At number 4, World Finals 13 really had its fun moments all throughout the night, and it's one of the most memorable World Finals in all. There was a pretty fun racing competition with Tom not only having to come from behind in some races again, but also winning the championship race with a truck that was clearly injured and only getting worse as the night went on, right? And beyond Tom's runs, other runs were close and definitely left anyone watching wondering who would be moving through to the final round, as it felt like there was a decent list of candidates for that final round. It was once again a very competitive World Finals racing competition. In freestyle, one of the better freestyle events in this time frame. Lots of very solid in front runs, but they were all coming in just behind Cam's absolutely amazing run. And I mean, there were some really good runs during this night, but Cam's was just at another level, and it's one of the best runs in World Finals history, right? Obviously, you have moments like Mark McDowell getting El Toro Loco stuck in the container again, which made it interesting, right? Because he was in a position where it was going to be very hard to knock him down, right? You weren't going to be able to just go after him. He was kind of wedged in that trailer. You really had to hit him hard, as Dennis showed in the encore. But it was kind of like a strategy now, right? How are drivers going to approach not only going for a backflip off that obstacle, but also trying to send it off the other side? Are they going to try and leap over the El Toro Loco? Are they going to play it conservative and try and go off the side? We saw some drivers end up not playing it conservative. They ended up trying to go over, clip the El Toro Loco, and ended up crashing down to earth. A lot of guys that went for backflips after the El Toro Loco landed in there ended up not being able to complete it because the El Toro Loco kind of kicked the truck off differently. But it's impossible to not mention that, or to mention that, and to not mention George Balahan's consecutive backflips, which unfortunately came after time was up, right? So this World Finals had a lot going for it, a lot of big moments, a lot of memorable moments, and a lot of competition, and that's why it gets rated so high at number 4. Number 3, World Finals 7, 7.875 out of 10. A very iconic World Finals at number 3, World Finals 7. For some reason, right, I feel like people don't talk about this World Finals as one of their favorites, but it definitely deserves a lot of praise, and it's easily one of the best Las Vegas World Finals to ever happen. Racing had really close matchups at times, and also chaotic matchups, right? Think about chaotic matchups. Tom versus Dennis in round 2. Tom had the lead into the turn, but hit a turning pole, and then crossed the final jump sideways, and ended up going up onto one wheel to save his truck after the finish. Neil Elliott had Dennis beat in the semifinals until he flipped his truck in the turn. And one of my favorite World Finals races of all time was Jimmy Cretin coming from behind with a perfect turn without using rear steering to just barely beat Pablo in the semifinals by like a quarter length of a wheel, right? And then the final round race, Dennis Anderson, Jimmy Cretin, in one of the closest final races in Las Vegas World Finals history, which really showed that the field didn't have too much separation between them. It really felt like even though Dennis was the fast qualifier and was laying out good laps, he was vulnerable that night and could have been beaten. He had a very hard bracket to go through. In fact, really everyone had hard brackets to go through because there were so many trucks that were consistent and fast that night. So a very competitive World Finals end up with two very competitive drivers in the championship race, with Dennis beating Jimmy Crete by like the length of a wheel. And if that wasn't good enough, freestyle was even better than the racing portion. It started out very strong, right? The first few runs were strong, including I think just the second truck out, Del Scorcho with Frank Krimmel behind the wheel. He put on some crazy moves, some big air, and just overall a very energetic freestyle run for being so early out. And basically every run after that continued that trend of crazy moments to provide throughout the night. I think about Charlie Pauken, his crazy save and crazy freestyle which took the lead. Jim Kohler's mega crash over the pond, crashing down into earth. Tony Farrell going over the garbage truck, going over the trailer, and then trying to wheelie it into that RV trailer combination, kind of for a triple combination move. Very, very impressive there, and it really got the crowd on their feet. Dennis's solid and consistent freestyle run, which nearly got him another freestyle championship. But then Tom Meents bringing out his own truck to jump over, thanks to Neil Elliott. And then after jumping over his own truck, putting together one of the most insane Las Vegas World Finals freestyle runs in history. This was an absolutely amazing World Finals. So much good in it. That's why it gets put at number 3. Number 2, World Finals 18, 8 out of 10. Here's the diamond in the rough at number 2, World Finals 18. Think about all of the World Finals events that surround this one and how they're all outside of the top 10. Think about World Finals 14 at number 10. World Finals 15 at number 15 or whatever it was at. World Finals 16 at number 14. World Finals 17 at number 16. World Finals 19 down low at like 14 or whatever it was. 14, 13, whatever. It's amazing that World Finals 18 could be as good as this one was. Now, once again, just like this time frame, racing was very competitive. I don't think it was quite necessarily as good as some of the others around it, right? Like, I think World Finals 15 and 16 might actually have World Finals 18 beat, maybe even World Finals 17, but it was still very good, still had upsets, still had some close matchups. And of course, who didn't love that Jim Kohler made it all the way to the semifinals for the World Finals racing competition? I think it was before that night, Kohler had 3 wins at the World Finals in 17 years. Then he ended up getting 1, 2, 3, well, like 4, 3. He got 3 wins. So he doubled his win total in just one night. That is absolutely amazing. And then to top it all off, a very close championship race between Ryan Anderson and Tyler Menninga. And pretty much that had to be decided in a replay review. So a very, very, very nice racing competition. Then moved into freestyle, which somehow was even crazier. It felt like this was the one time when they went to the 2-night World Finals in Las Vegas where the track was the perfect blend of big, but also not too big to where it was like impossible to put in good runs and people were flipping way too soon or braking too soon, right? It didn't feel like too many trucks were braking throughout the night. I think about some later runs like Mark McDonald broke doing a backflip, but really a lot of the stuff was braking because of backflips, right? There were a lot of trucks that broke after backflips. But it kicked off with some pretty good runs. I think about Bryce Kenny and the Mohawk Warrior sitting in the hot seat for a good bit. Randy Brown having a pretty good run early on. And the bar just kept getting raised throughout the night. After Bryce Kenny, you had Jim Kohler with his insane air and his good run and his crazy, after his big air, how crazy he went after that. Lee O'Donnell with his historic front flip, which took the lead. Cam McQueen going for a backflip, over rotating, but then still bringing it back after a second backflip. And then going for his corkscrew, broke the truck there, but he had a very good run going, maybe could have taken the lead. And then Neil Elliott's run, right? Second to last truck out, did the reverse backflip, had a crazy last few hits. Unfortunately, I think that run was the best of the night, but it didn't win in the fan judging eyes. But, not only was this a good, solid freestyle night, but it had really big moments as well, right? It wasn't just good solid runs, it was good solid runs with a front flip in one of the runs, a reverse backflip in one, some of the biggest air, a corkscrew, other people tried to do corkscrews, a backflip that ended up turning into a second backflip, it's one of the best freestyle competitions in Las Vegas history. Historic night, right? And it's one that any Monster Jam fan can look back on fondly as one of the last World Finals event, and it was actually a really good one. So that's why World Finals 18 is at number 2. Number 1, World Finals 9, 9.25 out of 10. To the surprise of absolutely no one, number 1 goes to World Finals 9. It is so very rare to get an event that can deliver on pretty much every front possible, but World Finals 9 did just that with every single moment of the night. The first round of racing was chock full of close finishes, right? It was like every single race was a photo finish. It was absolutely insane. And then this even extended on into later races and later runs and later rounds, right? Second round had close racing. Third round did. Semifinal did. It was absolutely insane how times were so close for nearly every race all night long. Now, it looked like, once again, the championship was going to have to go through Tom Meents. But after making it to the final round, he had mechanical issues. So he couldn't make it to the final round, and it set up a battle between John Ciesok and Jimmy Cretin, right? It was another final race where both combatants pushed too hard in the turn, and they kind of faltered. Jimmy once again swung the truck out just like he did in World Finals 4 and took down a turning pole, while the winner, John Ciesok, had to find a way up the ramp and kind of over the finish line sideways. And Ciesok was able to bring it home for the second year straight by once again just putting in solid, consistent runs. Nothing flashy, nothing brilliant, but also nothing that was all that slow, right? So after an outstanding racing competition, it was like freestyles could be hard to live up to. And somehow, some way, freestyle, as if racing wasn't already fun enough, freestyle took it up to a whole new notch. And it started immediately out with a bang with Chad Tingler's crazy run, big moves, big air, and his triple bus stack leap, right? And it's easy to forget with all the crazy runs that there were some more solid runs that happened, and that's just because so much great happened in the night, right? And it's hard to remember the good runs that happened, right? Steve Sims' first ever World Finals run was absolutely insane, a very good run there. I think about how good Lindsey Wink was going, how he got stuck on the on that concrete cement mixer type obstacle, whatever it was, the tanker that he got stuck on. And then he had to get his way off, and then once he got off, he was like, I already ruined so much of my time, so he started going ballistic out on the course. And think about Lupe's very good run, Dennis's very good run as well. There were just so many runs out there that were good. And then you had the big moves like Chad Tingler's, right? And then you had Dawn Cretin with her very good freestyle run, and then her amazing save after just narrowly flipping the last bus on the triple and tumbling the truck over. It somehow came back over onto all four wheels and got her into the hot seat. Looked like she might have won the whole event. But then Adam Anderson put out a spectacular freestyle run, right? Adam just purely had the best run from a momentum, moves, and consistency standpoint, right? He had it all. He had saves, he had good hits, he had great momentum, he got from obstacle to obstacle. It was just one of the perfect freestyle runs. And in reality, there's probably 5, 6, 7 runs from this event that could have won other World Finals freestyles if it was a different year. But it just so happened that the 2008 World Finals had multiple winning caliber runs in just one night of competition. So it is hard for any event to top the magic of World Finals 9. From the competition to the craziness to even the perfect track layout, World Finals 9 was Las Vegas' grandest night in terms of the Monster Jam World Finals, easily claiming the #1 spot with absolutely zero doubt. So that's all for my list. Here's a rundown of those 19 events and where I placed them one final time. What did you think of the list? Do you have your own or anything specific you think about certain World Finals that might differ from me? how about you leave a comment below for some discussion, right? That's the fun part of these lists. They're purely opinion based, and it creates great discussion about past memories and how different people feel, right? No two lists are going to be exactly the same, which is absolutely great, and I love to see that. So that's all I have here. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you later.